I was 28 years old when I finally understood that some people are simply incapable of love, even when that person is supposed to be your mother. The realization hit me like a truck as I sat in my hospital bed alone, watching other patients receive flowers and visits while my phone stayed silent. 3 days earlier, I had called my mom from the emergency room, my voice shaking as I explained that I needed surgery. Her response still echoes in my mind. "I cannot just drop everything for your drama, Madison. You are an adult now." The dial tone that followed was the sound of 28 years of hope finally dying. Before I share how this moment became the catalyst for the hardest decision of my life, I want to connect with all of you watching tonight. Let me know in the comments where you are tuning in from, and if this story resonates with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories that dig deep into family dynamics. Trust me, this journey gets intense, and you will want to hear how it ends. Growing up in suburban Denver, I thought every family operated like mine. My mother, Patricia, was a registered nurse who prided herself on being logical and efficient. She kept our house spotless, our schedules rigid, and our emotions in check. My father, David, worked as an accountant and seemed content to let Mom handle all family decisions. They were not cruel people, just distant ones, who believed that providing food, shelter, and basic necessities was enough to fulfill their parental duties. From as early as I can remember, physical affection was rare in our household. When I scraped my knee as a 6-year-old, Mom would clean the wound with clinical precision, but skip the comforting hug that came naturally to other mothers. "Pain builds character," she would say, handing me a bandage and sending me back outside. When I cried, she would tell me to use my words and explain why I was upset, as if emotions were problems to be solved rather than feelings to be acknowledged. My younger sister, Emma, seemed to understand these unspoken rules better than I did. She learned early to be self-sufficient, to handle her problems quietly, and to never ask for more than the bare minimum. I, on the other hand, kept hoping that if I was good enough, smart enough, or helpful enough, I might earn the warmth I craved. I became the family mediator, the one who remembered birthdays, organized holiday gatherings, and tried desperately to create the closeness that never came naturally. When I was 12, I came down with pneumonia that kept me bedridden for 2 weeks. While Dad continued his normal routine and Emma stayed with our aunt, Mom took care of my medical needs with professional efficiency. She administered medication, took my temperature, and ensured I followed the doctor's orders. But she did it all with the same emotional distance she might show a patient at the hospital. There were no extra blankets tucked around me with love, no comfort food brought to my bedside, no gentle hand checking my forehead for fever. Just the basics delivered without warmth. During those long, feverish days, I watched reruns of family sitcoms and wondered why the mothers on television seemed so different from mine. They worried visibly about their children, fussed over minor illnesses, and showed genuine distress when their kids were hurting. I told myself that Mom was just practical, that her nursing background made her less emotional about medical issues. I convinced myself that her competent care was her way of showing love. As I entered my teenage years, this pattern continued. When I broke my wrist during a soccer game, Mom drove me to the emergency room and handled all the paperwork with impressive efficiency. She asked the right questions, understood the medical terminology, and made sure I received proper treatment. But when I tearfully asked if she could stay home from work the next day to help me manage with the cast, she looked genuinely puzzled. "You are perfectly capable of adapting," she said. "I have responsibilities at the hospital." High school brought new challenges and the same emotional void. When I struggled with anxiety during my junior year, requiring therapy and medication, Mom approached it like any other medical issue. She found the best psychiatrist, ensured I attended appointments, and monitored my medication compliance. She even attended family therapy sessions when required. But she participated with the detached professionalism of a case manager rather than the concerned involvement of a mother. When the therapist suggested that our family might benefit from more emotional openness, Mom politely disagreed, stating that excessive emotionalism was counterproductive. College provided my first real escape from this emotional desert. I threw myself into student life, forming close friendships and experiencing genuine warmth and support for the first time. My roommate Sarah came from a loud, affectionate Italian family who hugged freely, cooked together, and called each other multiple times a week just to check in. Spending holidays with her family was a revelation. I watched in amazement as her mother fussed over a minor cold, as family members expressed genuine concern for each other's problems, and as love was demonstrated through countless small gestures of care and attention. For the first time, I began to understand that my family's dynamic was not normal. The emotional distance I had grown up with was not just a different style of parenting, but an actual absence of the nurturing connection that most families shared. This realization was both liberating and devastating. I felt validated in my long-standing sense that something was missing, but I also felt grief for the childhood I had never experienced. After college, I moved to Portland for a marketing job, keeping in regular but superficial contact with my parents. Our conversations followed a predictable pattern: updates about work, health, and practical matters delivered in the same tone one might use to discuss the weather. I continued to hope that distance and maturity might somehow bridge the emotional gap between us, that my parents might finally show interest in my inner life rather than just my external achievements. When I turned 25, I met James through work. He was kind, emotionally available, and came from a warm, close-knit family. Dating him highlighted even more starkly what I had missed growing up. His parents called him regularly just to chat, remember details about his life and feelings, and genuinely enjoyed spending time with their adult children. When James got food poisoning during our second month of dating, his mother drove 4 hours to bring him homemade soup and sit with him. The contrast with my own upbringing was stark and painful. James and I grew serious quickly, and I found myself planning a future with someone who understood emotional intimacy in a way my family never had. When we got engaged after 2 years together, my parents' response was typically restrained. "Congratulations," Mom said over the phone. "Have you set a date yet?" There were no tears of joy, no expressions of excitement about gaining a son-in-law, no questions about whether I was happy. Just practical concerns about timing and logistics. Planning our wedding became another exercise in managing my expectations. While James's family threw themselves enthusiastically into every detail, offering help, sharing ideas, and expressing genuine excitement about our big day, my parents remained politely distant. Mom attended dress shopping when specifically invited, but offered no opinions or emotional investment. When I asked if she wanted to help choose flowers or discuss catering options, she replied that I was perfectly capable of making those decisions, and that she trusted my judgment. The wedding itself was beautiful, but I felt the absence of maternal warmth acutely. While James's mother cried happy tears during the ceremony and gave a heartfelt speech about gaining a daughter, my mother maintained her composed demeanor throughout. Her speech was brief and focused on wishing us success and prosperity, rather than expressing any personal emotions about the occasion. I tried not to let it overshadow the day, but I found myself grieving once again for the mother-daughter relationship I had always wanted but never had. The first few years of marriage were happy ones, but they were also marked by growing tension around my relationship with my parents. James could not understand their emotional distance, and his obvious confusion and sometimes frustration made me defensive. I found myself making excuses for their behavior, explaining that they had different ways of showing love and that their practical support should be valued even if it lacked warmth. But deep down, I was struggling with the same questions James was asking. Why did my parents seem so indifferent to my happiness? Why did they never ask how I was feeling or show interest in my emotional well-being? When James and I decided to start trying for a family, I harbored secret hopes that becoming a grandmother might soften Mom's edges, that the prospect of a grandchild might awaken some maternal instincts that had seemed dormant during my childhood. I imagined her knitting baby blankets, offering advice about pregnancy, and perhaps finally showing the kind of nurturing behavior I had always craved. When we shared the news that we were expecting, her response was characteristic. "That is wonderful news. Have you chosen a pediatrician yet?" My pregnancy was complicated by severe morning sickness that lasted well into the second trimester. I lost 15 pounds in the first 3 months and was frequently too sick to work. When I called Mom hoping for sympathy or advice from someone with medical knowledge, she offered clinical suggestions about managing nausea, but no emotional support. "Many women experience this," she said matter-of-factly. "It will pass." When I mentioned feeling scared about the severity of my symptoms, she replied that worry is counterproductive and suggested I focus on following medical advice. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening in March, when I was 28 weeks pregnant. James was traveling for work, and I was home alone when I began experiencing severe abdominal pain. At first, I tried to convince myself it was normal pregnancy discomfort, but the pain intensified rapidly, accompanied by bleeding that I knew was not normal. Terrified and alone, I called an ambulance, and then in a moment of vulnerability and hope, I called my mother. "Mom," I said, my voice shaking, as the paramedics worked around me. "Something is wrong with the baby. I'm in an ambulance heading to Portland General. Can you come? I am really scared, and James is in Chicago until tomorrow." The pause that followed felt like an eternity. When Mom finally spoke, her voice had the same calm, measured tone she used for routine conversations. "Madison, I understand you are frightened, but I have a full shift tonight. Mrs. Henderson is scheduled for surgery tomorrow, and I cannot abandon my responsibilities. You have excellent doctors there, and panicking will not help anything." "Mom, please," I begged, feeling more alone than I ever had in my life. "I might be losing my baby. I need you here. Can you not call in sick just this once?" "I cannot just drop everything for your drama, Madison," she replied, and I could hear the slight irritation in her voice. "You are an adult now. The doctors will take excellent care of you, and there is nothing I could do there that they cannot do better. I will call you tomorrow after my shift to check on your status." The line went dead, and I stared at my phone in shock as the ambulance raced through the Portland streets. Even in my most pessimistic moments, I had never imagined that my mother would refuse to come to the hospital when her grandchild's life was potentially in danger. The physical pain I was experiencing suddenly seemed secondary to the emotional devastation of realizing that my mother truly did not care about my well-being in any meaningful way. At the hospital, emergency surgery saved both my life and my baby's, but the experience left me traumatized in ways that went far beyond the medical crisis. As I recovered in the ICU, surrounded by beeping machines and concerned medical staff, I was struck by the irony that complete strangers were showing more concern for my welfare than my own mother had. Nurses checked on my emotional state, doctors explained procedures with genuine caring, and even the janitor who cleaned my room asked how I was feeling. James caught the first flight home and arrived 12 hours after my surgery, devastated that he had not been there during the crisis, but relieved that we were both safe. As he held my hand and cried tears of relief and fear, I realized that this was what love looked like. This was how people who care about you respond to crisis, with urgency, with emotion, with the understanding that everything else becomes secondary when someone you love is in danger. Mom did call the next evening, asking for an update on my status, in the same tone she might use to inquire about a weather forecast. When I tearfully explained how scared I had been, how alone I felt, and how much I had needed her support, she seemed genuinely puzzled by my emotional response. "The medical team handled everything appropriately," she said. "I do not understand why you are upset when the outcome was positive." "Because I needed my mother," I whispered into the phone. "I needed you to care enough to be here when I thought I might be dying." "That is not rational, Madison," she replied crisply. "My presence would not have changed any medical outcomes. I had responsibilities to my own patients." In that moment, I finally understood with crystal clarity that my mother was fundamentally incapable of prioritizing my emotional needs over any other consideration. It was not that she loved me less than her job or her other responsibilities. It was that she did not understand love as I understood it. She saw relationships as contracts involving mutual obligations and practical support, not as emotional bonds requiring nurturing and prioritization. The revelation was both devastating and oddly liberating. For 28 years, I had blamed myself for not being worthy of my mother's love, assuming that if I could just be better, more successful, or more deserving, she would finally show me the warmth and care I craved. Now I realized that her emotional distance had nothing to do with my worthiness and everything to do with her own limitations. The weeks following my hospital stay became a turning point in my relationship with my parents. As I processed the emotional trauma of nearly losing my baby while feeling completely abandoned by my mother, I began to understand that continuing to hope for change was actually harmful to my mental health. James and I attended counseling sessions where I worked through the grief of accepting that my parents would never be the loving, supportive family I had always wanted them to be. My therapist helped me recognize that my repeated attempts to earn my parents' emotional investment had created a cycle of disappointment and self-blame that was affecting my ability to form healthy relationships and believe in my own worthiness. She encouraged me to consider what kind of boundaries I needed to protect my emotional well-being and that of my growing family. When my daughter Sophie was born 3 months later, healthy and perfect after weeks of careful monitoring, my parents' response was characteristically restrained. They visited the hospital, briefly admired the baby with polite interest, and left after 30 minutes because they did not want to overstay. There was no overwhelming joy, no tears of happiness, no expressions of wonder at their first grandchild. Mom took a few photos with her phone and mentioned that the baby looked very healthy. Watching them interact with Sophie over the following months confirmed my growing understanding that they were simply not capable of the kind of emotional connection I wanted for my daughter. They held her when asked, but without the natural affection that seemed to come so easily to James's parents. They bought practical gifts like diapers and baby clothes, but showed no interest in playing with her, reading to her, or forming the kind of bond that makes grandparent relationships special. More importantly, I realized that exposing Sophie to the same emotional distance that had shaped my childhood would be a form of harm I was not willing to accept. I wanted my daughter to grow up understanding that she was deeply loved, that her feelings mattered, and that the adults in her life would prioritize her emotional well-being. I could not reconcile those goals with maintaining close contact with grandparents who viewed love as a series of practical obligations rather than a deep emotional commitment. The decision to limit contact did not happen overnight. I started by reducing phone calls and visits, testing whether my parents would notice or express any concern about the distance. They did not. When I stopped initiating contact entirely, weeks would pass without hearing from them. When they did call, it was for practical reasons to confirm holiday plans or share updates about their own lives. They never asked how I was doing. Emotionally, never inquired about my recovery from the traumatic birth experience, and never showed curiosity about Sophie's development beyond basic health milestones. James initially worried that I was making a decision I might regret, but as he watched my stress levels decrease and my confidence as a mother grow, he came to understand that protecting our immediate family's emotional well-being was more important than maintaining relationships that consistently caused me pain. We decided together that Sophie would grow up knowing she had grandparents, but that our interactions with them would be limited to occasions where their emotional distance could not hurt her. The final conversation came when Sophie was 6 months old. I called my parents and explained calmly that I needed to step back from our relationship to focus on my own healing and my family's well-being. I told them that their response to my medical crisis had made me realize that we had fundamentally different understandings of what family relationships should involve, and that continuing to hope for change was preventing me from accepting reality. Mom's response was predictable. I do not understand why you are choosing to be dramatic about this. We have always been supportive parents. When I tried to explain the difference between practical support and emotional connection, she became impatient. This is ridiculous, Madison. You cannot cut off your family because they do not meet your emotional expectations. Dad said little during the conversation, as was typical, but when pressed for his thoughts, he simply said that he respected my decision and hoped I would reconsider when I was thinking more clearly. Neither of them fought for the relationship or asked what they might do differently to maintain contact. Their acceptance of my decision confirmed what I had come to understand, that losing me was an inconvenience rather than a heartbreak. 3 years have passed since that conversation, and I have never regretted my decision. Sophie is now a confident, affectionate 3-year-old who knows she is deeply loved by her parents, by James's family, and by the chosen family we have built through close friendships. She has never experienced the emotional confusion of wondering whether she is worthy of love because she has never been exposed to relationships that make love feel conditional or distant. I have learned to stop grieving for the parents I never had and to appreciate the family I have chosen and created. James and I have built a home filled with the warmth and emotional connection I always craved. We express our feelings openly, we prioritize each other's emotional well-being, and we have created the kind of family environment where Sophie will never question whether she is truly loved and valued. Sometimes people ask if I miss my parents or feel guilty about cutting off contact. The answer is complicated. I miss the parents I wish I had, but I do not miss the relationship we actually had. I feel sadness for the grandparent relationship Sophie will never experience, but I feel relief that she will never experience the emotional confusion and self-doubt that marked my childhood. I have traded a relationship that consistently caused me pain for the peace of accepting reality and the joy of focusing my emotional energy on people who can return it. Looking back, I realized that the moment in the ambulance, when my mother chose her work responsibilities over my crisis, was actually a gift. It forced me to stop making excuses for her limitations and to finally see our relationship clearly. It gave me the clarity I needed to choose emotional health over family obligation, and that choice has made all the difference in the world. So to anyone watching who might be wondering whether they are being too dramatic or too sensitive about family relationships that consistently leave them feeling unseen or unvalued, let me share what I wish someone had told me years earlier. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself and your children is to accept that some people, even parents, are simply not capable of the emotional connection you deserve. And sometimes walking away from those relationships is not giving up on family, but rather choosing to create the kind of family you truly want and need. What do you think about my decision to cut contact with my parents? Have any of you faced similar situations with family members who could not provide the emotional support you needed? Share your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real stories about family dynamics and personal growth. And please share this video with anyone who might need to hear that they deserve relationships that truly nurture and support them. Thank you so much for listening to my story, and I hope it brings some clarity to anyone struggling with similar difficult family decisions. Remember that you deserve to be truly seen, valued, and loved for who you are.